Okay, so the question that we focused on was how does the medical community profit on Black lives? And just to introduce us, first we have
Faith Massey.
Then we have
Runway.
And then we have me, Anaya. So basically what we're gonna go through today is first we have the history. We're gonna talk about the history of the medical community profiting off the lives of the Black community. Then we're gonna go into the theoretical frameworks, and then we're gonna connect the theoretical frameworks to the ethical issues, and then we're gonna bring it all together in a conclusion.
So we're gonna contextualize with a bit of history. So to frame the first part of our history presentation, it's the dehumanization of Black lives. And then we're gonna focus on the streamline of lack of consent. First, we're gonna start with a video.
Okay, so we have a video, but it's not playing.
Is this a URL link?
No, like you click on it and then.
Yeah, you like put it in, it's like a link, but then it pops up as the video, so all you gotta do is click on it. But I'm presuming since this is like a PDF version of the.
Right, so probably just didn't transfer over.
Was your file in PowerPoint or which one?
No Google Slides.
It would be interesting to see it. Yeah, the file you sent me is PDF.
We can just share it with them.
The issue is that this connection doesn't, it's not wonderful, so I don't think there's no plan on here. Or if you call it, just open it when you're on it, you can. Okay, good.
The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It was an outrage to our commitment to integrity and equality for all citizens. Clearly racist. This was President Bill Clinton's apology following the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. It started in 1932. Hundreds of Black men were recruited for what they thought was free medical care. Instead, it was a secret study to track the impact of syphilis on the human body. Those with and without syphilis were told they were being treated for bad blood. Now, that was a local term used to describe an umbrella of diseases at the time. The truth? None of them received medical care. For 40 years, doctors gave the sick men placebos and mineral supplements to track the full progress of the disease, keeping the men's true statuses secret. By the time this study was shut down by a whistleblower, 28 men had died, 100 more passed away from related complications, and 40 spouses had been diagnosed with the disease, passing it down to 19 children. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of those participants, and they were awarded $10 million.
This is kind of a love story. Because what is this? And this? And this?
So essentially, you already got the brief overview, but something I want to highlight is there was an answer to syphilis at the time, and it was penicillin. And they essentially profited off of Black lives, didn't give them what could have literally saved their lives and many more to come, and utilized the disadvantages over Black people because of the lack of financial and medical access. Over 600 lives were affected. I mean, we already know the data. 128 participants, 100 of which died of complications, 28 of actual syphilis. We know all this, right? But my whole point here is the generations to come. What is this teaching the Black community about the medical field? That we can't trust them.
Okay, so basically, in the end, the participants of the experiment, they ended up going to court and they ended up suing. So in the end, they ended up getting a $10 million settlement, but if you look at this chart, it shows that $37,500 was given, out of the $10 million, $37,500 was given to the living people with syphilis, $16,000 was given to the heirs of the deceased syphilis, $15,000 was given to the living control group of the experiment, and then $5,000 was given to the heirs of the deceased control group. Now, obviously, this doesn't equal 10 million, so all the other, it's about like a little over 9 million. That's all unclaimed funds right now, so that's just sitting there waiting. And the $37,500, this actually maxed out the amount of living people with syphilis. Like, they were given no more money than that. So that just kind of shows that they got the settlement, yet none of the funds are being claimed. Like, the $10 million wasn't being claimed.
So another example is Henrietta Lacks. So she had 2 samples taken from her cervix without her permission, and one was healthy tissue, one was cancerous, and then the other one like mutates and multiplies itself. And they have a lack of consideration surrounding her allowance and of the extraction, and is showing injustice. And now these cells are sold between $400 and thousands of dollars per vial, and it's profiting off of the Black community, and it's a lack of bodily autonomy. That's all.
The next subsection is the harm of white curiosity and how white curiosity is profitable to everyone that's not white.
Okay, so basically for this section, we have 2 examples. The first one on the left is a lady named Sarah Bartman, and then the one on the right was a picture from a young African girl in a Western dress. She was basically, so to start with Sarah Bartman, basically, and she was born in 1789 in Africa's Eastern Cape, and this lady, she had a condition called steatopygia, and this basically just caused you to have an extreme, like, large, bottom half due to, like, buildup. And while alive, she was studied by scientists, and she was constantly fetishized by white men and women, and she was seen as, because it wasn't normal, her body was always fetishized. It was always trying to be looked at and poked at. And then she died at the age of 26, and a man named Georges Cuvier, he made a plaster cast of her body and then dissected it. And when he dissected it, he picked out her brain and her genitals, and then he displayed them in the museum. And he also described her, in the museum, her body's actually described as grotesque. And this just shows how, like, one, they didn't get her consent. Like, they didn't ask her before. When she was alive, she actually never, like, became fully naked around anybody, just as respect to herself. And then as soon as she died, they took all her clothes off and they just dissected her and acted like she wasn't even a real human being. And they didn't even ask for her consent. So it just shows how, like, they just had no regard for the Black American life. And then the other person, this little girl was in 1958, the Rose Fair in Brussels featured a Congolese village, and this basically is a picture that boasted emblematic. It was boasted a picture that became emblematic of this phenomenon, which was a young African girl in a Western dress. She's fed by the outstretched white hand of a patron, and a fence stand between them, and throng of visitors watch. So this just also shows how they just see Black people as like an object and not really a human, and they were just constantly dehumanizing them.
So next we're gonna go over how this leads to modern day medical mistrust, because I wanted to be very clear that this isn't an old thing that's happening. This is something that still plagues the Black community to this day. So that's me. So first I'm gonna tell the story. So basically my mom had me very young. I have a Black mom. And since she was seen as a low income Black woman, you know, with all these kids, even though she only had me, the doctors didn't listen to her. So I couldn't breathe. I was speaking well, and then I started not speaking well. I was having complications. Long story short, she goes to one doctor. He says, oh, that's normal. She's so young, da 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 da. goes to a next doctor, says the same thing, goes to a next doctor, says the same thing. She finally gets referred to a specialist after advocating for her baby, which was me, and she was the first doctor to actually listen. Ended up saving my life. If I didn't get that surgery, I literally would have died because of medical gaslighting.
So another one is inadequate amounts of pain prescriptions. So it is how like white people think that black people experience pain differently, and they experience less pain. So this resulted in black patients, and they're 22% less likely to receive pain at any medication compared to white people, and or they're giving lower dosages. And because of this, you can see pregnancy death rates are more, black women are over 3 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. And this is because they're overlooked because they think that that black people have less pain than white people. So it does that, and then in the graph you can see that like black women are more.
Is this current data?
Huh?
Is this current data?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then another one is transgenerational trauma. Like in the Tuskegee experience, it not only affected the participants but their wives and their families, and it caused trauma, making people scared to seek help, and like it caused trauma for the black community when it's out seeking medicine.
And then lastly, we just have lack of access to healthcare in general. And basically when it comes to black people, they always receive the second-rate healthcare. They always receive second-rate healthcare when compared to white people. Many studies have shown that doctors are choosing not to prescribe the most effective health and life-conserving treatments to racial minorities. That's the presentation. This is basically all just due to like implicit bias. It's just responsible for the way that they treat certain people. They use stereotypes, and they use research that they kind of made up to just basically decide that black people don't deserve the same treatment that white people do. And if you look at these rates, it just shows that the uninsured rate among African Americans was 9.7%, while it was 5.4% among whites, and this is almost double that. And then when you go to the average cost of annual health care, for like premium healthcare that's actually good, that'll actually do something, it's almost 20% of the average household income. And that's a major cost when you pay attention to stuff, when you look at stuff like the income inequality and other economic challenges that African Americans already face. It just shows that these healthcare rates are just kind of like unrealistic because they can't afford good healthcare, and then they try to take the state healthcare, and that's not even good enough to cover costs. So it just really shows that this all is just showing that the lack of access to healthcare is really it's just not there when it comes to African Americans. Okay, now we're going to jump into the theoretical framework. So basically we have the 3 schools. We have the utilitarianism, we have deontology, and then we have justice.
So first, utilitarianism, it's directly negatively affecting the black community, and we can use the example of the Tuskegee experiment because they were targeting only African Americans. Like only African Americans were recruited for the experiment, so it's not equal for everyone. And not only is it not equal, it's not for the greater good of everyone, because it was targeting a specific group of people in the community. So it wasn't fair.
And then when you look at deontology, deontology basically focuses on treating others how you would want to treat yourself. And if you really look at it, African Americans, when it came to doctors, they were treating them at a second-hand rate. They weren't giving them the help that they would be giving themselves if they were in that position. And deontology also focuses on people being treated as ends, not means, and following unconditional obligations. But you constantly see people always see African Americans being treated at second-hand rate, and it's taking either a long time for somebody to step in, or they're not stepping in at all. They're just standing there as bystanders, and that just really shows how unethical this whole situation really is.
Okay, and then another one is justice, and it's based on like fairness and equity, and then the participants were harmed because of this treatment was withheld because they had penicillin for the treatment, and it also violated non-male clients, and that's basically the obligation of a physician not to harm a patient. and they were getting harmed because they weren't getting the right treatment, and it also caused deaths.
And then now we're at our discussion questions. Do you want us to go ahead and move into it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is there any right amount of compensation for the trauma these people are being put through, still being put through? I know at the beginning we spoke on how there was a
10
settlement,
million.
right, a 10 million settlement, which to some might sound great and to others might sound like not enough. So we want to see where y'all gauge was. Yes.
I just had a question, was that 10 million like per person, or was that just 10 million?
It was just like in total, and like the numbers showed they actually didn't even receive the full 10 million. Most of it is sitting there as unclaimed funds.
Got
So,
it.
That strikes me as absurdly low. I mean, you have other medical settlements that range in hundreds of millions of dollars. And the number of people affected and the intergenerational effects. By the way, just to clarify, who actually conducted those experiments?
The government.
The federal government?
Correct.
And this would have been during the, well, it ended in 1947, so this would have been during the FDR and Truman administrations?
Was it Clinton after? Right, I'm thinking it's Clinton, Bill Clinton.
No, that's like later, that's like later.
Oh, after, he said something.
So
Yes.
the experiments took place in the 1940s, correct?
We got a slide.
Yeah, it was Clinton many years later, apologizing.
Exactly.
yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, that should be the lives lost, but the, again, the generational effects, the income streams that unrealized as a result of this, 10 million seems like a pittance to me. Agree, disagree?
And during that time, a lot of African American people didn't have access to medical care. So it was much like I'll give you free medical care if you do this experiment. And I
Right.
only need black men. And in the black community, as a black man, you have to be like take a caregiver, right? You have to put your bootstraps on, work hard, provide for your family. So in my opinion, from my sociological perspective, they probably felt obligated to take care of their family. So it's like, I'll do this risk of free healthcare, whatever they're gonna do to me, so I can provide. And then the whole time, it wasn't even doing anything for them, and it was actually killing them, and their families, their wives died, their children died.
And deliberately withholding what was already recognized as an
Exactly.
effective treatment.
Exactly.
So, what a horrible, horrible episode.
So question number 2 is, why do you think it took so long for someone to say something, whether it was a whistleblower or bring a light to the situation through media or word of mouth?
Yes, Bill Clinton 50 years later.
Right.
Yes, Claire?
For the syphilis one, maybe because like it was put on by the federal government, so even if you knew about it and thought it was wrong, it was like this like large authority was doing it. And I think people are like afraid to speak out against the government all the time.
Yes, Matthew?
Yeah, I think an interesting component when I think about it is you guys mentioned in your presentation the dehumanization component and how people were able to dehumanize the people that they were conducting the experiments on. So if you as a society or a group were conducting the experiments or doing it to the other or someone who you view as dehumanized, I can see it continuing in a way that people don't whistleblow because they have no objection to it, because there's this othering going on.
Which connects back to like curiosity and the harm of it, right? Like prodding and probing and just not even asking for your consent. Like, I'm gonna do what I can by literally profiting. It goes back to our main question. I'm profiting financially, they're profiting like learning, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, these are people. It's not technology, it's not a mathematical equation. Like, these are our people, but over centuries you have continued to disrespect us, not have access for us, not have speech, like space to say what we wanna say. And then you continue to profit of it and you just give us a little bit of money. Like, for me personally, putting my 2 cents, I think the reason why people didn't say anything because it was culture. You know what I'm saying? Even though you could be the white person that's like, I don't wanna do this, da da da, but are you really gonna stand up? Are you really gonna say something? And we see that now. People don't wanna, like, it was a previous slide, people don't wanna put their 2 cents in. They'd rather just stay safe in the shadows. And not necessarily saying that black people need a white voice all the time, that's white heroism, we don't need that. But learn when to mobilize yourself to provide access to leverage your powers to others that don't have that.
Another point here, I mean, you emphasized the point that the Tuskegee Incident bred a deep distrust of the medical community in general before the academic community. And that point has been cited in looking at the relatively low rates of COVID vaccine penetration in African American communities. But I'm just kind of pushing back here a minute. And it happened a long time, 75 years, and it's tragic, of course. But we have, at this point, overwhelming evidence of the efficacy and safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. And I guess my question here is, can we plausibly kind of attribute the low, fact that comparatively low vaccination rates in African communities to what happened many years ago? Or is it more a matter of simply access?
I think, like, personally, I know people, like, in the black community who don't want to get the vaccine just because of, like, they knew about the Tuskegee experiment and they didn't want to, like, have something happen to them. It is that generational, like, mistrust in the medical community because, yeah, like, especially, like, on social media when the whole, like, anti-vaccine and all that, it was, the Tuskegee experiment was brought up and, like, other experiments where they were experimenting on black people were brought up, and that's why a lot of black people did not want to get the vaccine at first, even after everything. They think, like, they target black communities, so.
Okay, all right.
I think it also, I feel like it also has to do kind of just with the lack of trust in general, because, like, not saying that it's not safe, but one, not that the government was trying to force it, but it came with a lot of, like, pushing just to get the vaccine, so I feel like that also came with, like, you're like, why are you pushing it so hard for me to get it? And then I feel like that kind of came in the brain, like, well, is it actually really good if they force? Because as we can see, there were studies before where they're like, oh, it's a good thing, like, you should really get it, and then they turn around and it's killing them, so I feel like that could also be just like you're putting so much pressure on me getting it, that makes me not want to get it too.
And you think that argument holds when it's not speaking President Biden or Anthony Fauci, whoever, but local doctors, local clergymen urging people to get the vaccine? That distrust resulting from this ugly history still persists.
Yeah, I feel like it all just started with that distrust, and the fact that there's more than one example. Like, as you see, there wasn't just the Tuskegee, like, there was constant example after example. It might not be as, and today there probably are still examples in other countries that we might not even know, like, be aware of at the moment.
Or even here, I mean, are we really gonna have an article saying about it now? Because it's so, I mean, we allow covert things to happen, but when it comes to overt things, so things that are explicitly like, this is wrong, we do our best to try to hide it. So finding up-to-date examples that mirror the ones that we have historically was not as easy, but we see the disparity, right?
Okay, so your other questions here. How much responsibility can we put on the government for the Tuskegee?
Well, that was more like, we know the Tuskegee one was government, like, ran, but for the other ones, the one like the Sarah where she had the disease